Welcome to the Probate Nation. Our show today focuses on the process of selling Virginia real estate, either in a Virginia estate or a conservatorship. You know, after all, the tangible personal property has been removed from the family home, whether by auction, donation to charity, distribution among family members, or hauled away to the dump site. You then are often faced with the challenge of selling the real estate. The process of preparing the property for sale involves many decisions, from what is your timeline goal to get the property sold, who can sign contracts to list and sell the property, what should be the list price, what fix-up work should and should not be done, what buyers are looking for in the current market, and so much more. While the process may seem overwhelming, the most important decision you need to make at the outset is selecting a local real estate agent. These professionals have been through this entire process many times. They can simplify your decision-making with choices and recommendations to maximize the sales price and get the property sold sooner rather than later. We are pleased to have as our guests for our show today two local Virginia realtors. They will serve as our guides in discussing the above decisions to be made, and will share some of the practical advice on what to do and pitfalls to avoid along the way. Our first guest is a realtor with Keller Williams Realty located in Chantilly, Virginia. She has been a realtor since 2005 and works with both sellers and buyers throughout Northern Virginia. She is a member of the National Association of Realtors, the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors, and Business Networking International. And she is also a certified property distress expert. Our second guest is a realtor with Sampson Properties in Alexandria. He also works with both sellers and buyers in Virginia and soon in Maryland as well. He is a member of the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors, the National Association of Realtors, and the Society of American Military Engineers. He is also an active duty captain in the U.S. Army, stationed at Herbert Temple Jr. Army National Guard Readiness Center in Arlington, Virginia. Please welcome Virginia Realtors Sue Russell and Preston Capers. Guys, thank you both for coming and joining us for this show. You know, before we kind of get into the sort of the initial thing that I always, as a lawyer, want to ask, is to talk about, who can actually list a property for sale and who can actually sign the deed at closing. And these are topics that we have actually gotten into in prior shows with closing attorneys as well. And if people are interested, they can go view those shows on the Probate Nation website. But let me kind of summarize some of the things that we learned from those shows, okay? In the case of an estate executor or administrator, we need to make sure we look at the will admitted to probate to see if there are directions to sell the real estate. Or is there a court order entered directing the executor to sell the real estate? Absent either of those two things, all the authority to deal with the real estate belongs to the heirs of the decedent under the will or under the intestate laws of Virginia, because the property belongs to them. If you're dealing with a conservator, the court order appointing the conservator should be examined and make sure that we have the necessary authority. Now, some cases we have people using a power of attorney, and you want to be careful, make sure that power is broad enough and strong enough and specific enough to identify that real estate and that they can sign and sell the property. So I would say early on, one of the things that if you're dealing with real estate in a state or a conservatorship, speak with an attorney and make sure you understand who can do what as far as this real estate before you get too far down the road. So let's go now, as we are assuming someone has authority to act. I'm going to come to you, Preston, and tell me a little bit about the importance of a date of death appraisal of the real estate as opposed to a tax assessed value.
Well, so Richard, with the date of death appraisal, what you're looking at is when their property owner is actually passed. This is going to give you a more detailed analysis of the property as well as the adjacent comparable properties. This is going to help you hopefully establish a new tax basis for the property. This is going to be a more up-to-date look and detailed look than what you would get with a county tax assessment, which is typically done at the beginning of the year and doesn't even look at the details of the home itself. The whole purpose of raising the tax basis is hopefully with an increased tax value of the home, when you come to sell the home, you'll have less to pay in capital gains tax.
Very good, very important. And a lot of people don't do that right away. So you find that we see property sold, 2 or 3 years later. Someone has to go back and do a date of death appraisal back, 2, 3 years ago. Now, Sue, I think Preston mentioned an important thing, and I want to come to you about this. The importance of, as opposed to an appraisal, what is a market analysis that a realtor does?
Sure, Richard, happy to answer. It's an apples to apples comparison with similar properties in the immediate vicinity that are either on the market or have sold. This is a great way to start a discussion as to what to list the property for. We take into consideration market dynamics, whether the prices are rising, whether they're lowering, whether the interest rates are low, allowing more buyers to take advantage of purchasing. And the bottom line is a proper analysis can help both the seller and the realtor set the right price for a home where hopefully the seller gets asking price or even above.
Now, Preston, we're in that whole process. One of the things we want to talk about, we have a house. How important is it to clean the property out before we start down this path of trying to sell it?
It's very important, Richard. One of the things you want to understand is the goal of this process is when you're cleaning to enable the buyer, to actually see themselves in the property. So one of the things you got to remember is you got to depersonalize the property. So that means taking down your photos and personal effects so that when buyers come to view the home, they can see themselves actually living in the property one day instead of it being just another property that they view.
Now, in addition to cleaning the property out, Sue, what do you think, or do you think it's important to do a pre-sale or pre-listing home inspection that the seller does on their own? Is that important?
It really depends on whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. The purpose, of course, is to know the objections that the buyer may give before we even go on the market. Is it important to remedy those or not? If it is a buyer's market, for example, you're going to want to do a walkthrough with the owner, get any contractors involved to get an idea of what types of issues there will be and the cost to remedy. Sometimes you might want to remedy those before you go on the market. If it's a seller's market, though, you're not going to really have to do anything because sellers are basically waiving everything. So it really just depends.
Okay. And now, Preston, I'm going to come back and we'll talk a little bit about, turn the page here and talk about property repairs and improvements. A lot of people will try to do a whole bunch of things, but what is the typical buyer looking for in a home to buy? Let's just start there.
Well, the typical buyer is looking, if you're looking at a younger buyer, they're going to be looking for something that's more open concept. They've got plenty of space to kind of stretch out. Whereas your baby boomers are going to be looking more for that main level or single level bedroom to where they don't have to have a lot of stairs. Due to COVID, a lot of times we're seeing a lot of buyers are considering having at least one space in the home that's going to be dedicated to a personal office of some sort. In addition to that, they're also looking for space outside the home so they can stretch out. So this is either going to be actual hardscapes like patios or just land in general so that they can relax in their own home.
Okay. Now, Sue, we're going to put this house on the market. Discuss for us the importance of kind of assessing the homes that the property will be competing against.
Sure. As a realtor, you want to ensure you know as much about the property as possible. If there are active properties, tour them, walk the lot, see if they back to a highway. Doing this will provide a basis to determine a competitive list price. It's very dangerous to allow the emotions of the seller to dictate the price. Doing so, often the house will sit, the listing will become stale after a couple of weeks, and as we all know, stale listings attract lowball offers. The market today is not the market of 5 years ago.
Okay, good. Well, Preston, how about discussing the importance of reviewing the property that we're going to put on the market in light of, as what Sue mentioned, what the buyer's looking for and what the competing markets are offering? How does those two competing things come into play as you begin to figure out what you're going to do with this property?
Well, Richard, you really have to understand that when you're putting on that buyer's hat, you've got to be evaluating the property and looking at it from their perspective and looking at all the warts, as well as you're also going to look at the fact that depending on the house's design and its concept, it may not appeal to all the different buyers that you're wanting it to appeal to. So how do you position that home to where it can be competitive, whether it be in price or it be in some adjustments as far as renovations to the home itself?
Okay. Now, Sue, when we talked during the course of preparing for this show, you know, there are every house has different things that may need to be done, deficiencies need to be addressed, and so on, whether from the home inspection or just from a visually standpoint. Should all of this work be done?
It really depends on what type of market it is, whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market. In a seller's market, most buyers are offering to just waive the home contingency. They're not asking for any repairs. They basically are trying to make it as easy for the seller to accept their offer. So that's currently the way that it is in a seller's market. Of course, in a buyer's market, it's very important, if the seller really wants to sell their home, to have those major items taken care of.
Sure, because otherwise they're going to be asking for seller concessions, which is basically a reduction in purchase price. So, Preston, assuming there's work to be done, who should do the work that's been identified to be done, either by the realtor or the home inspection? Who should do that work?
Well, Richard, that was a great segue, talking about the seller concessions and how that kind of adjusts the price. So in this case, it's really going to depend. So if the work is something that the buyer is looking to have done, say they have actually had a home inspection contingency and they want to have this work done prior to the actual closing, then the buyer is going to be the one that's going to be looking for, the seller is going to be looking for this work to be done prior to, so that they can actually meet the requirements of the buyer. But if this is something to where the buyer is willing to accept the property and close and just have the work done later, then in that situation, the buyer may be looking for some sort of seller concessions and then actually do the work afterwards. Either way, the realtor is going to provide them with a list of trusted contractors that can actually do the work. And then it's just up to the individuals to decide who does the work and who pays for it.
Well, I think you touched on a very important thing that, a lot of times folks will know someone in the neighborhood or some friend does work or whatever the case might be, but the realtors have people that they work with on a regular basis who they are trusted, and they know that they will not have any bad results from the work that's to be done, because those people want to maintain that good relationship with their realtor who is referring this client. So I think it's important for folks to take advantage of those Rolodexes, okay? Or we don't really do Rolodexes anymore. They're whatever the electronic version of that is, that realtors have built up, from their work as a realtor. Well, let's turn the page now and talk about staging the property. One of the things was discussed at the outset, of course, is you need to kind of look at the property and help the people who might buy it envision the property being theirs. Okay, so you clean the property out. So now I have an empty place. Okay, potentially. I have all the pictures taken down. Then there's this thing called that we hear about, which is called staging the property. So Sue, what does it mean to say that one wants to stage the property? What does that mean?
Sure. It's the opportunity to put your best foot forward to any buyer prospects. And it can mean many different things. It can range from decluttering to staging owner's furniture, if there is any left in the premises, to bringing in rented furniture. And even now in 2021, there's virtual staging, where even though the home is vacant, the buyer can look online and see several rooms that have been virtually staged, which is a really neat technology.
So Preston, I don't want to overlook this again, but why is it necessary to stage the property again?
You want the buyers to envision themselves in the property, and you want to get the best price possible for that property. So by giving the buyers that vision, you're going to get more offers.
Sure. And I know that people talk about, we don't want to have all the garbage bags in the corner. We don't want to have all the dog litter downstairs. We want them to see a nice, clean place. So I guess that makes. Now, Sue, if we're going to stage the property, I assume someone needs to make those arrangements. Is that something that the realtor does, or does the property owner do? Who takes care of that?
Yes, often the realtor is aligned with at least one professional stager. So the realtor will make that introduction and connect the seller and the stager. And sometimes the realtor will actually also be there in person to help execute some of the recommendations by the stager.
Now, I know you mentioned, Sue, when we were doing the preparing for the show, that you have a stager that comes through that kind of shows where stuff's to be placed. You know, there might be plenty of stuff there that could be used, but just how it's placed can make a difference if you have the sort of eye for that. So I know that that's something that you've suggested a number of times.
Absolutely.
Preston, you know, this all sounds great. You know, I think, well, great, I'm going to tell my realtor, let's go ahead and get the staging done. But I think there's a little problem here. Who's paying for this? I mean, is there a cost for staging, or is it for free? Does a realtor pay for that? How's that go?
So there is a cost, but like you said, who's paying for this? So as Sue mentioned, sometimes realtors are going to pay that consultation fee, and they're going to use that to also help them with assisting decluttering the home, because at the end of the day, the realtor's goal is to get the home sold, because that's when we actually get paid for anything. Other times though, the owner may actually be working with the staging company themselves, and they may actually pay them through contract actions for the services.
Okay, good. Well, I think that's important. All right, so let's turn now to presenting and listing the property. So Sue, when is the for sale sign typically put in the front yard? Or does something happen even before we get to that?
Well, Richard, it really depends on the seller's wishes. It can vary. If a quick listing is desired, it's as soon as possible within 48 hours when the property is activated in the MLS. Sometimes, if staging is going to be done, after staging is done and professional photos, then we'll put the sign. In a lot of cases, what realtors do is 1 to 2 weeks before it goes on the market, we have the sign in the yard with the coming soon rider to show the public that this house is coming on the market. You're allowed to have it in the ground for 3 weeks before the home gets on the market. Usually 1 to 2 weeks is a really good time frame.
Okay. So Preston, we have a signed listing agreement. As Sue said, we have a for sale sign that makes its way into the front yard at an appropriate time. When is the listing of the property actually made active in the MLS system?
Mm-hmm. So once you have all the MLS paperwork done, you've got the listing agreement signed by the actual seller, and then you've also executed all the realtor-based preparation and recommendations that you had put out and agreed with the seller. Of course, actually also having the staging and the photos done is the best part, because then you can actually upload all that information into the listing and make it active then. Sometimes though, you don't have all the photos right away, so you make it active and then you update it, and that can make it pop a little bit better.
Okay. Now, I mean, everybody these days seems to be using social media for goodness knows everything. So, Sue, is that social media something that is used to sell the property? And if so, when does that get activated to sell the property?
Absolutely, 100%, especially because the millennials and the Gen Zers, they love social media. What you want to do is within a week of going on the market, if possible, present that information on Facebook, Instagram, all different kinds of social mediums like that. And the idea is to get potential buyers excited before it even hits the market.
Okay, good. So Preston, how is one of the key things in the listing agreement is going to be the listing price. So how is the listing price established?
So this depends on the seller's timeline and also what are their needs for this money in the property. So if the seller has a timeline that is immediate, then a lot of times what the realtor is going to do is we're going to do a market analysis. We're going to present that price at recommendation to the seller, and we're going to say, hey, here's the price that we think you should sell it at. Other times, the realtor may have these discussions with the seller, and the seller's like, hey, this is the price I'm willing to sell it at, and that's it. So in those cases, the timeline is much greater because the seller's like, hey, I'm willing to wait for this price. So you've got those two kind of things. And then like Sue mentioned before, you want to make sure this listing doesn't go stale because that's not good for it. So, when we're providing that recommendation to the sellers, we're doing that because we want the property to sell on a certain timeline.
Okay. Now we talked a little bit about seller concessions, which again varies depending upon whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. Sue, what does it mean to say that there are seller concessions, and what are typical seller concessions?
If it's a buyer's market, buyers are asked to they ask the seller to give some concessions. Those can range from $500 to $10,000, depending on the days in the market, the condition of the property. So there are a lot of factors in that way. If it's a seller's market, no buyer is going to ask for any concessions. In fact, they're going to waive as many contingencies as they can.
Okay. Now, I'm going to continue with you, Sue. How is the property shown to buyer prospects?
Sure. The buyer's realtor schedules online. That request sends a text or an email to the seller, alerting them to either confirm or deny that the showing time is convenient. So sometimes if there are dogs, small children, if it's a different type of home, those kinds of things require a 1 to 2 hour notice, for example. So you need to consider that. And in a seller's market where you've literally got a showing every 15 to 30 minutes, they will take their pet and board the pet for the weekend. Typically, there's only one buyer in the property at a time, ranging from 15 to 45 minutes, but typically 30 minutes is the normal time for a showing.
Okay. Before we go to our next area, I wanted to come back to you, Preston. On the listing agreement, though, what is the normal time frame that the property is normally listed for? How many months?
So typically it's going to be 2 to 3 months is that you're going to want to list that property for.
Okay.
At least the agreement is.
Okay. Okay. All right, let's turn the page now and talk about lessons learned. I mean, those are the things that people really love to hear about. So I'm going to come back to you, Preston. I'll come to you first, Preston, since we're with you. Okay. Share with our viewers some of the lessons you learned over the years, sometimes the hard way, in the course of selling residential real estate.
I think that the main lesson is a lot of times you deal with sellers and they think, hey, my home is going to sell easily. So they don't think that you're going to need to do a lot of the work. They think, hey, why do I need a realtor? But my counter to that is, hey, if it was so easy, a lot of these for sale by owners would be flying off the market. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done to sell your home. So when it comes to selling the home, it's not just important to have a confident and capable realtor, but you need to also make sure that you're listening to this realtor and you're doing as they recommend. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where you and the realtor are going to fall out, and you don't understand the fact that the realtor, we're there to serve your best interests at the end of the day. We also want the home to be successful and sell, and we need your help doing that.
Sue, how about yourself? You've been selling real estate for many years. How about some lessons learned, pitfalls to avoid, advice you might have for our viewers?
Sure, absolutely. I've learned, especially as I get more years under my belt and more sales, not to waver as much with my professional opinion of list price. Sometimes homeowners who have sold many homes in their lives, they're a little more challenging to convince with respect to price and different recommendations. I explain to them, if we overprice a home, we will be chasing down the market. What that means is you start too high, it directly affects your showings and your interest level. In that situation, the listing becomes stale. We end up getting a lower price than we would have otherwise gotten if we priced it appropriately on day one.
Okay, well that's very good advice, and we certainly advocate that. We've covered a lot of material. Like we could talk about this for another hour easily. Okay, each of you guys could get a cup of coffee and let you guys talk, and I'll just sit back here and relax. But we're running out of time, so I'm going to say thank you on behalf of the Probate Nation to Sue Russell from Keller Williams in Chantilly and Preston Capers from Sampson Realty in Alexandria for taking the time to visit the Probate Nation and for sharing with our viewers your knowledge, advice, experiences in handling the sale of real estate, buying an estate or a conservatorship. Your comments this evening provide valuable information and are a great public service to the Northern Virginia community. So thank you both for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. You will need to make a host of decisions in order to sell real estate you are handling as a fiduciary. Our guests tonight shined a light on things to do and not to do as you undertake this task. Make appropriate improvements and repairs that serve to enhance the marketability of the property, but don't overdo it. And how you present the property to prospective buyers and how you price it can go a long way to get the property sold in a timely manner for a good price. What I take away from this show is that it is critical to hire a real estate professional who works in the marketplace each day. But more importantly, we encourage you to listen to and consider carefully their advice. This concludes our show this evening. We hope you found it informative. And remember that replays of this show and all shows to date can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.